I'm going to start with a little bit of instruction about our new sentence construction because I've realized it's presenting some trouble for people. The biggest thing I'm seeing people do is to switch the sentence, to flip it, so that they're trying to do this. I'll show you in Tuesday's STEM. Slavery existed in Africa while, and slavery existed in Africa when, and slavery existed in Africa even though. This is not right, and this is not what I'm asking you to do. It's possible, but this would be very challenging, and in some cases impossible. What I'm asking you to do is add the while, when, even though to the beginning of the phrase. So it's just like our before, after, if statements, and I'll show you some examples of those. Last week we did before, after, if, before the Pilgrims came, after the Pilgrims came, if the Pilgrims came. So this is the same exact construction, but replacing those words before, after, if with when, even though, and while. I know the first thing we did, because, but, so, that was the second half of the sentence, but we've really stopped that now, and now we're working on the first half of the sentence. So let's look at some examples. When you're changing this so that the STEM word appears at the beginning, it should set you up where you have to kind of explain what was happening at a certain time in the when statement. So when slavery existed in Africa, comma, what happened? I'm going to say the African tribal rulers and kings sold their slaves to regional tribes. Something I learned in the lesson, I put that in my STEM. Notice the comma happens right after that core kernel sentence, that phrase, slavery existed in Africa, comma. So one of the reasons we're doing this STEM is to train your ear into hearing that this sentence, the dependent clause of it, ends right here. Hearing that breath. When slavery existed in Africa, comma, pause. The African tribal rulers sold their slaves to other tribes. Just like in our other constructions, this is a complete sentence. And because it's a complete sentence, you need the comma. Even though slavery existed in Africa, slavery was not a lifetime sentence. And while slavery existed in Africa, and here you have an option to do something that's about time or something that's about idea. So I'll say while slavery existed in Africa, it also existed in other parts of the world, including Europe and Asia. That's my idea-based sentence. I could also take a time-based sentence and say, while slavery existed in Africa, and in this case, I'm thinking about it as at the same time that slavery existed in Africa, while slavery existed in Africa, the number of European ships visiting that continent doubled. So here, my while statement sets up an idea. While this happened, this also happened. And here, my while statement sets up time. While this was going on, this was going on. They're both right. While is such an interesting word in this case. If you've picked up on this, I usually give you two words that are more straightforward and one that is a little more complex and asks something else of you in your thinking. So this week, that's while. Last week, it was if. So here's a good example. I'm going to do one more. If you feel like you got it, you can stop the video. But if you feel like you need more, then stay tuned. We'll do Wednesdays. And so again, this is your STEM for the day. The Mende people won their freedom. I'm saying when, even though, while statements, so add when, even though, and while in front of that STEM. All right, so when the Mende people won their freedom, comma, here the comma. What else happened? I'm sort of trying to set up the time. When they won their freedom, they were allowed to return to Africa. even though the Mende people won their freedom, comma. So this is a contradiction of terms. I'm saying even though this happened, something else also happened. Even though they won their freedom, many other slaves brought over illegally were not so lucky. And lastly, while the Mende people won their freedom, I'm going to use the idea based, so while that happened, this other thing also happened. While the Mende people won their freedom, they also had lost much of their lifestyle back in Africa. So there I am working through the stems, and I hope this is helpful. If you ever have questions, if I'm not being clear or it's confusing to you, and you feel like you can't quite move on with that stem, just hang out in the async time. That's where I can work with you and your classmates. And your classmates who've hung back usually find that I'm able to get them quickly up to speed and make sure it all makes sense. So that's always on the table. But of course, thank you for your feedback. That helped me figure out, oh, I need to give you a little more instruction here. Okay,